Welcome to the coolest stuff on the planet.
Hey there, I'm Rachel, and I'm about to attempt to say hello in Polish. So, cześć.
Excellent. Well, what do I know? And I'm Kathryn, and we're on the coolest stuff on the planet. And so after this, it's back to the salt mines, huh?
Yes, indeed. And we'll explain that what that means in just a second. But as you can see from my terrible Polish there, we are heading to Poland today. We're going to check out this really nifty salt mine called Wieliczka. And this topic was actually inspired by my sister, who went a couple years back, and she sent me a postcard with these, she said they were gnomes, but they're technically dwarves. And ever since I was intrigued, I was like, what is that? What are these salt mines full of gnomes?
Yeah, this mine has existed from the 13th century. Salt was very important in the early economy. In fact, the word for salary comes from the word for salt, salarium, because the ancient Romans were paid in salt. So, you know, that was why it was so important. And in fact, that in Poland they had salt was also tender, so that explains why the mine was so important even back then.
And now, can you explain the phrase, back to the salt mines? Because when we were researching this topic, you sort of threw out that phrase, and I was like, what does that mean?
Yeah, well, nowadays it just means, you know, back to the grind. But originally it came from the fact that Russians would send their prisoners to work in the salt mines in Siberia. That was not a fun job, so that's where it came. To say the least. To say the very least, I'm sure. So yeah, that's where it came from.
So as Kathryn said, these mines are incredibly old. So what's neat about them when you're touring is that you can sort of see this whole history of mining, of salt mining, laid out before you. And that's just one of the reasons why this mine is one of the top tourist attractions in Krakow. But another thing besides the mining sort of aspect, they're kind of like museums, because they're full of statues and chambers carved out by the miners.
Yeah, and you know, they actually could use the salt to make the chandeliers. You know, the rock salt, they would actually dissolve it and then, you know, reconstitute it so we get this very clear glass-like appearance. So, you know, they just make these beautiful chandeliers out of salt.
That may be the most amazing fact to me of everything about this mine, that those chandeliers are made of salt.
Made of rock salt. And on the other hand, they could use the natural rock salt was gray, and so they used that to carve, you know, elaborate pieces like the Last Supper, all out of salt. And you know, the natural grays gave it a shading and made it look just really spectacular in that as well.
And as we said, these figures and all this stuff was carved by the miners as a way to deal with this dangerous, difficult job that they had to do every day.
Yeah, and in fact, the miners used to attend mass every morning in the mine, and you know, pray for protection. And you know, it's kind of interesting when you think about it, because most of them were self-taught artists, and they would actually carve these after hours. They did this on their own time. So
the mines aren't just you know, sort of mining over the centuries and kind of a museum. Today they're sort of kind of like an underground modern events venue. Yeah. It's really weird, but like you can get married down there, you can have an engagement party, you can listen to concerts, like all sorts of stuff. There's a restaurant. Yeah,
they got films, they show films there, they have sporting events there. And you know, in fact, you were mentioning the orchestra. They have actually a mining orchestra.
Yeah, it's been around for a long time.
Yeah. And you know, another thing that they also offer is the health spa. They've had one there from the 1800s, and you know, the air is really got very high levels of sodium chloride, as you would expect, and a lot of other minerals, and so it's really good for curing respiratory problems. So they have a whole spa there, and people go there for treatments.
That must be interesting.
Yeah, that'd be a really
underground spa.
Yeah, very different experience.
Oh, one other aspect of that sort of that high sodium chloride atmosphere is that is how these statues and chambers have been preserved so well over the centuries, because of the salt in the air.
Oh yeah.
If you want to take a tour of the mines, here's how it goes. So they have these wooden stairs that basically go down and down and down to the first level, and I think there are like 380 of them.
Wow.
But my sister was telling me, because I kind of wondered, like, I wonder if it's hard to go down the stairs. You know, you kind of wonder.
Yeah.
And she said, yes, it is. She said, like, if you're tall, you have to sort of hunch over a little bit. And she said by the end, like, her knees were like jello from walking down.
It's pretty steep, huh?
Yeah.
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 And you know what's interesting is that even with all of those stairs, the tour apparently only covers about 1% of the mine. and that takes you about 3 hours.
So you can imagine how big the whole thing is.
Yeah, it's about 300 kilometers long. And, it's been visited by figures throughout the centuries, like, Copernicus visited it, and, and also John Paul II also visited it. So
yeah, and they even have a statue of him.
yeah, that's right. They have one there. And, so they've had people throughout the centuries have gone to visit it.
It's really a cool thing to think about when you're taking a tour.
Yeah.
That you're sort of in illustrious company, I guess.
Yeah.
One other thing I thought was pretty fascinating about the mine is that there are a couple of salt lakes, and you can actually take a ferry across them, and some other activities. Isn't that right, Kathryn?
Yeah, actually, they've had people who have surfed on the lake. They've also had people who have done bungee jumping. So, there's been all kinds of activities. And, after about 700 years of continuous mining, the mine was actually closed in 1996 because of flooding, and also because the price of salt had dropped. Obviously, it was not quite the commodity it was, in past. And so now it's solely a tourist attraction.
Although it seems like it does pretty well, so...
Yeah.
It's doing all right.
I'm sure it's paying for itself.
Yeah. But that's just a fun little snapshot of the Velichka salt mine. Seems like a pretty cool place. Definitely on my list, Kathryn.
Oh, yeah.
But we hope you liked it. If you'd like to learn a little bit more about it, Amanda, our awesome blogger, she wrote a little blog post on it. So you should check that out on our blog site.
And we'll see you next time.
For more on this and thousands of other topics, visit HowStuffWorks.com and let us know what you think. Email travelpodcast@HowStuffWorks.com. Don't forget to check out our other podcasts, free on iTunes.